Welcome to NuTricia's Lifestyles. I'm Tricia Silverman. I'm a registered dietitian, a wellness coach, and a fitness instructor. Today we'll be talking about sneaky ways to manage your weight. Dr. Brian Wansink wrote Slim for Design. He's a researcher out of Cornell University. And what he's found is that we make nearly 200 subconscious food decisions every day. And what he found is that it's eating to change your eating environment than to change your mind. So we'll talk about changing your eating environment today. I'm going to give you lots of tips and strategies. Now, I want you to get dividends on the investment in time that you're making today watching my show. So at the end, when we're finished, I want you to think about one or two takeaways that you can implement in the next week. So we're going to start off by talking about visualization and goals, and then we'll move on and talk more about your environment. So visualization is really important in helping to achieve your goals. And one way that you can do visualization is to create a vision board. So this is my vision board. And what's nice about a vision board, it can help you to solidify your goals. So I made this vision board back in May of 2016. And what I put on, there were just things that I want to achieve in my life. I want to write and finish a book. I had fun in Disney with my family, so I want to go back there. I teach fitness, but I also want to become a yoga instructor. And then I love the images of the strong, fit woman in Oxygen magazine, so I'd like to write for them someday and be in their magazine. And then I put this over here, which is a recipe, and it's a picture of food and reminds me that I'd like to make a couple of new recipes, at least 2 new recipes every month, and that's what I encourage people to do. Think about setting a goal for recipes. I want to make 1 or 2 new recipes a month or a week. So think about your wellness goals, your life goals, and can you take the time to go through magazines, cut out what you want to achieve, go through the computer and print off pictures. So that's my vision board, and I hope that you'll consider this. And I first started out my vision board by just drawing pictures until I finally conceptualized it in this board right here. And then I keep this visible in my office so that I can see it every day. It's a daily reminder of where I want to go. So let's talk a little bit more about goals. It's really important to write your goals down, and many of us do that during New Year's time. And then what happens after that? What happens to these goals? I think it's so important to revisit your goals and then make your goals really specific. So if we just say, you know what, I want to lose weight over the next few months, well, that's great, but it doesn't give the brain any direction. If you say, you know what, I want to lose 10 pounds in 10 weeks. Oh, now we're getting somewhere. And then think about, well, how are we going to get there? So maybe we're going to do 5 days where we do some cardio. Maybe we're going to walk briskly for 30 minutes a day. And then maybe we're going to focus on certain things with our nutrition, portion control. Maybe we'll log our food into an app like Spark People or MyFitnessPal or Lose It. These things can be really helpful, and if you set goals and make them really specific, it sets the brain in motion. The brain will know what to follow and what to do. So important to set these goals, and then very important to revisit them to make sure that you're on track. So let's move along and talk about behavior change. So we want to make behavior change. We want to achieve these goals. Well, Dr. Susan Albers wrote 50 Ways to Soothe Yourself Without Food. And in that book, she talked about 3 ways to make behavior change. One is to just become more mindfully aware of the changes that we want to make. So maybe we want to start journaling, for example, and maybe becoming more aware of, you know what, I need to buy a journal, I need to start writing, thinking about when we're doing the writing, visualizing when that will be, where in the house we're going to do the journaling. The second way she talks about behavior change is taking baby steps. And I find this works with a lot of people that see me in my classes and that I coach. they make baby steps. They commit to 1 or 2 things to do each week, and that can be really, really helpful and help them to focus on change. Maybe it's drinking more water. Maybe it's watching the portion size of what they eat after dinner at night. Now, the third way to make behavior change is sweeping change. And some people do this and it works well for them. An example, there was a gentleman in one of my classes I was teaching in the town of Wellesley, and he came to one of my classes and he listened to what I had to say for that hour. A few months later, he told me, guess what? It was practically overnight. I did everything you said in that lecture, and my stomach problems went away, and I feel really good. And that's an example of a sweeping change. And that's great if you can change that way, but we're all different animals, and you have to figure out, I look at it as a puzzle, and finding the different puzzle pieces that work for us, the different ways of change that might work for us. Maybe baby steps works good for you, or maybe sweeping change would be really helpful. So let's talk about your food environment. And a lot of what we're speaking about comes from Dr. Brian Wansink's work. One of the things that he says is that we eat 80% of our calories within 5 miles from home, and that there are 5 food zones that we have to be concerned with. And these are food neighborhoods, so where you shop, the restaurants that you eat at, where you work and what you're eating at work, what supermarket do you shop at, and then the children's cafeteria. Now, we're going to leave out the children's cafeteria today, but we're going to talk about those other areas and give you some tips to walk away with. Now, an interesting study that Wansink did, he calls it the Syracuse study. So what they did is they went into people's homes, him and his students, and they observed what was on the counter in the people's homes, and they weighed them. So what they found is that if people had potato chips on the counter visible when you walked into the kitchen, they weighed 10 pounds more than people without potato chips on the counter. Now, if there was this one I found really shocking. Breakfast cereal on the counter. And this is actually a decent breakfast cereal, but breakfast cereal on the counter, and people weighed 21 more pounds than people without breakfast cereal on the counter when they went to their home. Now, what about this one? Soda on the counter. 29 pounds more than people without soda on the counter. Now, what about cookies on the counter? Cookies on the counter, 9 pounds more than a counter that doesn't have cookies on it. Now, what about fruit? So we have fruit over here on the counter. Well, if you have fruit on your counter, you might weigh 7 pounds less than people without fruit on the counter. And then what wasn't in a study, but I just wanted to give you some food for thought. If you have some vegetables, how about some winter squash, maybe a spaghetti squash or a nice butternut squash on the counter? That's also a cue to eat that food. So whatever food you have on the counter is a cue to eat that food. So we want to think about having more healthier foods on the counter, and then we want to keep the junky stuff away in the cabinets. Now, the next thing that I want to mention is an interesting several studies that were done out of the University of Minnesota, and this book is by Tracy Mann, so she's a researcher there. And it's really interesting research because NASA was commissioning scientists to do research on stress and eating. So the next thing that NASA is looking to do that's huge and amazing is send people to Mars. So what they want to do is figure out what are those problems that they might encounter, and then what can we do to fix those problems and prevent them before they happen. So what they're finding is that right now, when they send astronauts to space, when they go to the International Space Station for a few months, they lose weight. Well, they're away for just a few months. While they're doing that, it's not really that much concern, just a few pounds in a few months. But if we're sending them to Mars, think about Mars. It takes roughly 8 months to get there. Their mission might be a few weeks there or a few years, and then it's going to take a lot of time to get them back. Well, now we're talking about, ooh, that could be a lot of weight loss. For someone at a normal weight, that might be too much weight loss, and we don't want them to lose too much. So NASA wants to figure out how can we prevent them from losing weight, and how can we decrease their stress. And that's where Dr. Tracy Mann came into the picture, and she did a test, or a few tests, on comfort food, because she figured if you give astronauts the comfort food, it'll make them feel good, help decrease their stress, and they'll gain weight, so we don't have to worry about them losing weight in space. So before you test your theory on astronauts, they tested on people. And what they did for her studies, they gathered people and they asked them, what are your favorite comfort foods? And then they wanted to put them in a mood first, a bad mood. So she had her students gather movie clips that were just awful, that were sad, that evoked anxiety, and that made people angry. And while her lab is usually very cheerful, she said it was a very sad time for that year while the students were gathering these horrible movie clips. So what they did in the study is they showed the study participants, they showed them these horrible movie clips, and then they fed them their comfort food, and they surveyed them beforehand to figure out what exact brands of comfort food they like, what do they like, and they showed them the movie and then gave them the comfort food. And what they found is that comfort food can make you feel a little better, but was so interesting that any food can make you feel a little better. So why choose the comfort food when you can be choosing hundreds or thousands of calories when you can just pick a better food, a food that's healthier for you, and still feel better? And what they did then is they tested the comfort food versus a granola bar. And they found both the comfort food and the granola bar just made us feel good. And then they tested the comfort food versus just no food at all after they watched these awful movies. And they found that no food at all, after a while, whether you ate comfort food or no food, you still felt okay after a while. So now they're going to test how comfort food works on the astronauts. They're in the process of testing that now. But the takeaway from all of our studies was that instead of comfort food, if you're not feeling so great, you might want to just pick any food, pick a healthier food. So if I'm hungry and, if I'm not feeling so great, one of the things I like to do is to have old-fashioned oats and a little bit of peanut butter. And then what I love are gala apples. So oatmeal, I usually have a 1/3 cup or a 1/4 cup dry, and I put some water in there and cook that up in the microwave for about 1.5 minutes. And then I stir it, I put it on another 40 or 50 seconds, then I take a teaspoon or half a tablespoon of natural peanut butter, and then I cut up a nice gala apple. I love gala apples. Now, it's a yummy snack, and sometimes I make it part of a meal that I look forward to, the oatmeal, the cut up apple, and the peanut butter. And that's comforting for me. I don't need to have mac and cheese or Ben and Jerry's. This is something that I look forward to. Now, a little side note about the natural peanut butter. This is Teddy's, one of my favorite brands. I also love the Trader Joe's Natural. And with natural peanut butters, there's a layer of oil at the top. Once you open it, you keep it in the fridge. But before you open it, you can turn it upside down in your cabinet overnight, and the oil will distribute evenly throughout the peanut butter. Now, and then when you open it, again, we want to keep it in the fridge. You could also just mix that oil in. So let's move on and talk about some other strategies in our kitchen. So the whole kitchen itself is just a cue to eat. Remember, we mentioned earlier that cereal on the counter or cookies, that's a cue to eat that food. But just being in the kitchen is a cue to eat food. So think about taking the family to the family room after you have meals. This way, you won't be just hanging out in the kitchen and eating too much food. Now, the other thing that we want to think about is the color of the plates. So what I have here is a piece of cake on a white plate. And when we look at the piece of cake on the white plate, we think, you know what, it's really not much cake there. Oh, maybe I'll have another slice of that. But now look at the difference when we put the cake on a red plate. Whoa, now that's a piece of cake. It really pops. And now we think, you know what, one piece is probably more than enough. So again, just look at the difference on the white plate. It blends in, doesn't look like much. And now on the red plate. So people tend to serve themselves 18% more when their food matches the color of the plate. So be very careful about the type of food that you're eating and the color of plate that you have. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about portion control. So one of the things that's important to keep the size of your plates around 9 or 10 inches. And when we have a larger plate, we tend to eat more. What the studies have found is that we eat 22% less when we eat food on a smaller plate. Now I'm going to show you a little magic trick. I have a half cup of rice. So here's my half cup of rice. And this is a half cup of rice on a large plate. So if you can see that half cup of rice on the large plate, you know, it's kind of lonely there, not taking up too much space, but we're going to do a magic trick. Here's our magic trick. And now we're going to put the rice on a smaller plate. And what you can see here is that, wow, now look, it's taking up more of the plate, so it looks like more. And so many studies have shown that when we eat off a larger plate, we're going to eat more food. So you want to be very careful about how much we're eating, but then about the size of the plates. And that goes the same for the size of the glasses. So when we choose glasses, we want to go with smaller, we want to go with narrower, taller glasses. This is the 5 ounces of wine that's recommended that people have when they drink alcohol. It's recommended to not go beyond 5 ounces for one drink of wine for women, and for men it's 2 5-ounce glasses a day, and then after they're 65, for men it goes back to just one glass a day, or 7 total wine drinks in a week. So the 5 ounces, that's recommended serving size. This is in a wider glass. Now it's the same 5 ounces in the taller, narrower glass. So if you're drinking out of these wide glasses, it doesn't look like a lot, and we tend to serve ourselves more. So if you like wine and you want to cut back, maybe we go, it still looks like a lot because it filled up the glass. Maybe we drink in the taller, narrower glasses. So just a little takeaway for you there. Now, another thing I wanted to mention is that what Wansink found in his study of looking at the joy of cooking, and a lot of us have this in our kitchen, and my mom had this, and then now I have the joy of cooking. Well, the recipes have increased by 44%. The calories in the recipes, 44% from the 1930s until 2006. So we might wonder, why do we weigh more than people did back then? Well, our portion sizes and our recipes have grown, so we really have to pay attention to portion size. Now, I want to talk about watching TV, because TV watching is one of those things that can really help to pack on the pounds, that distracted eating. In one of my classes, when I spoke about not watching the TV when we eat and more mindful eating, tuning into our food, one guy decided that was the one thing he was going to work on that week. And what he found is that the next week when he came in, he lost 4 pounds. 4 pounds from just giving up the TV. Now, a little side note, there was another lady in another class of mine, and she liked to drink beer. And she gave up, after coming to one of my classes, gave up the beer, and a week later she lost 4 pounds. So it's really interesting how sometimes a poor habit like the TV watching or a certain food can really contribute to weight gain. So what's the problem with the TV? Well, one of the problems is that we're just not tuning into our food because we're watching the TV. And we're not sensing when we're full. We're not tuning in to our fullness and our satiety. The other thing that people do is they tend to pace their eating with the TV show. The show goes on, they start eating their chips, the show is over, they're done eating. Or they're done eating when the bag is empty. So we want to portion out snacks and have small amounts of them and not watch TV at the same time. Now I want to move on and talk about the restaurant and eating at the restaurant and things that we can think about in the restaurant environment. So Wansing's studies found that when people sit closer to the bar, they are drinking more. And why might that be? Well, they probably see some fun-looking drinks leaving the bar. They hear that clicking and clanging of the glasses, so they might order more drinks. What he found that people that sit closer to the TV, they tend to order more fried food. People that sit at higher tables tend to order more salads. Just really interesting research. Now let's talk about the buffet. So I'm going to show you what they found at the buffet. So at buffets, what Wansink did and his students did is they observed people eating at buffets. And I'm going to show you the slim versus the heavier diner at the buffet. So let's start with the slim diner. This is the buffet that they're going to. And this can be at a restaurant, but think of a buffet, maybe at a wedding. But this is the slimmer diner at the buffet. Notice they're going for the smaller plate. That's the slimmer diner. They also find that the slimmer diners, they're facing away from the buffet and they're further away from the buffet. They find that they chew their food 15 times, whereas the heavier diners chew their food 12 times. So here's the heavier diner. And then, wow, there might not be any room left, so now they have to finish that food and they go back more. But what they find is that the heavier diners, so they just zoom right in, get the plate, and then they just start packing on the food. The slimmer diners, they were browsing, checking things out, and then they went back and got their plate. So the heavier diner, they just start and they go. And then they sit closer to the buffet and they sit facing the buffet. And they're chewing their food less. So just some takeaways. Scout things out. Get the smaller plates. And then sit further away and not facing the buffet. This can be really helpful. We're going to talk about the workplace, and I want to talk about the candy dish in particular. What Wansink has found by studying workplaces is that if you have a candy dish in or on your desk, you tend to weigh 15.4 pounds more than people who don't have a candy dish in or on the desk. Now, if the dish is clear, like this one, what he found is that people tend to eat 9 candies. So let's look at the 9. So here are the 9 candies. Now, in these 9 candies, there's about 640 calories and 16 teaspoons of sugar. So let's take a look at that. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That 10 was weak, by the way. 13, 14, 15, 16. Now, we look at the 16 teaspoons of sugar, and there's your 9 candies a day. Now, when I did the math, if you ate 640 calories of candy every day, so even outside of the workplace, that equals 64 pounds, extra pounds that you could be carrying a year. But let's just go back to the workplace and look at the 15.4 pounds that Wansink found. So when I did the math and I figured, you know, let's do 48 weeks of the year and let's take those 15.4 pounds and figure out what does that really mean. So when I did the math and figured things out, what I think is that people are eating about 3 candies a day. And that's what's really equaling that. So this could be these 3 right here. So that's equaling those 15 pounds that they might be carrying. So just 3 candies a day over the course of the year, that could be 15 pounds you're carrying around. And then if you do 1 candy a day, that could be an extra 5 pounds over the year, just 1 little candy a day. Now, if we think about 3 candies can be like eating 3 pieces of fruit. Now, what would make you feel more full? 3 pieces of fruit can make you feel more full. 3 pieces of candy, so when we think about that, it's not very filling. We tend to have these 3 and, oh, maybe now I'll have another because that sugar makes you want to have more sugar. But if you have an orange, we normally don't say, I had an orange, let me have another orange. We feel satisfied. Or we had an apple, we feel satisfied. So think about reaching for fruit when you want something sweet. This is what people do in cultures of longevity, where they don't eat lots of processed food. They want something sweet, they grab fruit. And that's what we should be thinking about as well. So I want to wrap up here. I want to thank you so much. I have so much gratitude for you being here and watching this show today. And I want to reward you with dividends on that investment in time you spent. So that will be by you leaving here and doing 1 or 2 things that we chatted about today. So when I teach my exercise classes, at the end of class, we do a nice inhale and exhale. A nice inhale and exhale, and then I have them close their eyes, which you can do. Close your eyes, and for 10 seconds, I want you to think about what's 1 change that you can make this week. So go ahead and think about that change. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you join me for my next show, where I'll talk about shocking sugar. And in shocking sugar, we'll talk about how much sugar is in common foods and how much sugar we need each day or don't need each day, and some simple tips that you can take away for reducing your cravings and managing your weight. Thank you again for joining me. I'm Tricia Silverman. Bye-bye.